The storm raged outside, a symphony of howling wind and lashing rain that rattled windows and left the streets of Willow Creek drenched and deserted. Inside the town's modest animal shelter, a sense of warmth and routine prevailed. Volunteers scurried about, tending to rows of barking dogs and purring cats. The faint smell of wet fur mingled with the earthy aroma of kibble. It was a regular evening at the shelter until she walked in. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The door slammed open, pushed by a fierce gust of wind, and every head in the room turned toward the entrance. A woman stood there, cloaked in a sodden trench coat that hung heavily on her shoulders. Her hair was plastered to her face, and her hands gripped a leash that stretched taut behind her. At the other end of the leash was the largest dog anyone had ever seen. He was enormous, nearly the size of a small horse, with a shaggy, wolf-like coat that glistened with rainwater. His deep brown eyes gleamed with an intelligence that made several people stop in their tracks. The dog was calm, standing resolutely beside the woman, but there was something about him, something that made the room fall silent. "I need your help," the woman said, her voice trembling, though it was unclear whether it was from the cold or something else entirely. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the shelter's director, Marla Donovan, who stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am," Marla began, her voice gentle but wary, "that's quite the dog you've got there. What seems to be the problem?" The woman hesitated, her grip tightening on the leash. "This isn't just any dog," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He can talk." The room erupted in murmurs. A few people chuckled nervously, assuming it was some kind of joke or a sign that the woman wasn't entirely well, but Marla held up a hand to quiet them, her gaze fixed on the woman and the strange dog. There was something in her tone, in her eyes, that made Marla take her seriously. "Why don't you come into my office?" Marla suggested, motioning toward a door at the back of the shelter. The woman nodded, relief washing over her face, and she led the giant dog into the office, its claws clicking softly against the linoleum floor. Once inside, Marla closed the door and gestured for the woman to sit. The dog settled at her feet, his massive head resting on his paws. His eyes, unnervingly human in their depth, seemed to study Marla as she pulled up a chair. "Start from the beginning," Marla said, folding her hands on the desk. "What's going on?" The woman took a shaky breath. "His name is Max. I found him a few weeks ago, wandering near the edge of the forest behind my house. He was injured, had a deep gash on his side. I couldn't just leave him there, so I brought him inside and took care of him." Marla nodded, encouraging her to continue. "At first he seemed like a normal dog. A little too smart maybe, but still normal. But then, a few days ago, he started speaking." Marla's brows knitted together. "Speaking how?" The woman glanced down at Max, who looked up at her with an expression that was almost reassuring. "He talks like a person, full sentences, clear as day." Marla opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, Max lifted his head. "It's true," he said, his voice deep and resonant, with a faint growl at the edges. "I can talk." Marla froze, her brain struggling to process what she had just heard. The words were unmistakable, the tone unmistakably human. Yet they had come from the massive dog sitting calmly before her. She blinked, half expecting to wake up from a bizarre dream, but Max's steady gaze told her this was no hallucination. "How?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. "It's a long story," Max said, his tone weary. "But I'll tell you this much. I'm not just a dog. I was someone else once. Someone human." Marla stared at him, her mind racing. "You were human. What happened to you?" Max let out a heavy sigh, his massive chest rising and falling. "It's complicated. I don't remember everything, but I know I wasn't always like this. Something happened, something terrible, and now I'm stuck in this body." The woman, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "I've tried to help him, but I don't know what to do. That's why I brought him here. I thought maybe someone at the shelter would know, or could find someone who does." Marla leaned back in her chair, her thoughts a whirlwind of disbelief and curiosity. She had spent years working in animal welfare, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. A talking dog who claimed to have once been human? It was the stuff of fairy tales and science fiction, not the quiet, practical world of shelter work. But Max's words, his very presence, made it impossible to dismiss. "We'll do everything we can to help," Marla said finally, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "But first, we need to figure out what's going on." Over the next few days, the shelter became a hive of activity. Word of Max's existence spread quickly, drawing a mix of curiosity and skepticism from the staff. Max, for his part, remained cooperative, answering questions and sharing bits of his fragmented memories. He spoke of a life he could barely recall, flashes of faces, places, and emotions that felt both familiar and foreign. The woman, who introduced herself as Clara, stayed at the shelter, unwilling to leave Max's side. She seemed deeply attached to him, and it was clear the feeling was mutual. Max often rested his head in her lap, his deep brown eyes filled with gratitude and trust. But the mystery of his condition remained unsolved. No one could explain how or why he could talk, or how he had come to be trapped in a dog's body. Then one evening, as Marla was closing up the shelter, Max said something that changed everything. "I remember," he said suddenly, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "I remember the man who did this to me." Marla froze, her hand hovering over the light switch. "What do you mean?" she asked, turning back to face him. Max's eyes glowed with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. He was a scientist, obsessed with experiments that blurred the line between humans and animals. I was one of his test subjects." The room fell silent as Max's words sank in. Clara, who had been sitting nearby, gasped. "You mean someone did this to you on purpose?" Max nodded, his massive head dipping slightly. "Yes, and if he's still out there, he might be doing it to others." Marla felt a surge of anger and resolve. Whatever had happened to Max was a violation of the natural order, a cruel and unethical act that demanded justice. She knew she couldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. With Max's guidance, the shelter staff began piecing together clues about the mysterious scientist. It was slow, painstaking work, but bit by bit, they uncovered a trail that led to a secluded laboratory on the outskirts of town. The place was abandoned, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. But inside, they found evidence of experiments that defied comprehension. Rows of cages, medical equipment, and documents filled with cryptic notes. Among the papers was a single photograph of a man in a lab coat, his face cold and calculating. Max recognized him immediately. "That's him," he growled, his voice filled with a simmering rage. The discovery set off a chain of events that would change everything. Authorities were called in, and the story of Max, a giant talking dog with a tragic past, captured the public's imagination. News outlets flocked to the shelter, eager to share his tale, and Max became a symbol of resilience and the enduring bond between humans and animals. But for Max, the journey was far from over. Despite the attention and support, he remained focused on one goal: finding the man who had done this to him and ensuring he could never harm another soul. The days following the revelation of Max's story became a whirlwind of action and emotion. Willow Creek, once a quiet, unassuming town, transformed into the epicenter of a growing mystery that captured the world's attention. Max's tale was too extraordinary to remain a local secret. News vans parked outside the shelter, journalists camped at the edge of the property, and social media buzzed with theories, questions, and a tidal wave of support for the talking dog who had once been human. Despite the chaos outside, the atmosphere within the shelter remained charged with a sense of purpose. Max, though exhausted by the constant scrutiny, was more resolute than ever. He had regained enough of his fragmented memories to realize the scale of the scientist's experiments. "He didn't stop with me," Max had said one night, his voice heavy with regret and anger. "I was just one of many. There are others out there, animals who were once people, trapped like I am." Clara had grown fiercely protective of Max. She remained by his side, fielding questions from reporters and sheltering him from the prying eyes of the public. She had been the one to find him, and though she had never imagined the journey it would lead her on, she refused to abandon him now. Clara had always believed in second chances, and Max's existence was proof that even in the darkest circumstances, redemption was possible. Meanwhile, Marla and the shelter staff worked tirelessly to untangle the web of clues they had uncovered at the abandoned laboratory. The documents they had found hinted at a network of facilities, each tied to the same enigmatic figure, Dr. Elias Thorpe. The name was unfamiliar to most, But a deeper dive into the records revealed that Thorpe had once been a prominent geneticist, celebrated for his groundbreaking work in neural transplantation. Then, nearly a decade ago, he had vanished from the public eye. What they uncovered next sent a chill through the shelter staff. Dr. Thorpe had been discredited after allegations of unethical experimentation surfaced. Experiments that blurred the line between human and animal cognition. He had been stripped of his academic credentials, and his research had been shut down. But it seemed that Thorpe had not given up on his work. Instead, he had gone underground, continuing his experiments in secrecy. Max became the key to unraveling Thorpe's network. Though his memories were hazy, certain triggers, a word, a scent, a specific pattern of light, would unlock flashes of his past. One such memory led them to an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of a neighboring county. When Marla, Clara, and a small team of investigators arrived, they were met with a haunting sight. Cages stacked high, each containing animals with eyes too expressive, too human to be ordinary. The animals were frightened, but intelligent, their gazes darting between the newcomers with a mixture of hope and wariness. Among them was a sleek black panther with scars etched across its flank, a hawk with feathers tinged unnaturally silver, and a fox whose vocalizations resembled the fragmented speech of a toddler. These were Thorpe's creations, victims of his twisted pursuit of scientific progress. Max approached the cages with a solemnity that silenced the room. "You're safe now," he said, his deep voice carrying a tenderness that brought tears to Clara's eyes. The animals responded in subtle ways, a tilt of the head, a low chirp, a hesitant step forward. They seemed to understand him, as though they shared an unspoken bond forged by their shared suffering. The rescue operation was swift but emotional. Each animal was carefully removed from its cage and transported back to the shelter, where they were given medical care and a safe place to recover. The staff worked tirelessly to provide for their unique needs, while Marla coordinated with legal and scientific experts to determine the next steps. The discovery of the other animals brought new challenges and new questions. Could these creatures ever regain their human forms? Did they even want to? And most pressing of all, where was Dr. Thorpe now? Max's resolve grew stronger with each passing day. "We can't stop until we find him," he told Clara one evening as they sat outside the shelter, the stars glimmering above them. "He's out there hiding, and he won't stop unless we make him." Clara nodded, her hand resting gently on Max's massive paw. "We'll find him," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination, "no matter how long it takes." The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A scientist named Dr. Evelyn Harper, who had once been a colleague of Thorpe's, reached out to the shelter after hearing Max's story. Harper had distanced herself from Thorpe's work years ago, disgusted by his unethical practices, but she still remembered some of his methods and habits. "I never thought I'd see the day his experiments would resurface," Harper admitted when she arrived at the shelter. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. "But if what you've told me is true, then Thorpe has gone even further than I feared." Harper examined Max and the other animals with a mixture of fascination and sadness. "This is beyond anything I've seen before," she said. "Thorpe must have perfected his techniques. But the fact that Max can speak and retain some of his human memories, it means there's a chance we can reverse what's been done." The shelter erupted in hope at Harper's words. For the first time, the possibility of restoring Max and the others to their human forms seemed within reach. But Harper warned them that the process would be risky and that they would need access to Thorpe's original research to have any chance of success. That meant finding Thorpe himself. The search intensified. With Harper's help, they pieced together a profile of Thorpe's likely hideouts and began tracking down leads. Clara and Max accompanied Marla and the investigators on several trips, their bond growing stronger with each shared experience. Max's intelligence and keen senses proved invaluable, and his presence had a calming effect on the other animals, who seemed to draw strength from his leadership. Finally, after weeks of relentless searching, they found him. Thorpe's hideout was a dilapidated mansion hidden deep within a forest, its windows boarded up and its grounds overgrown with weeds. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. It was the kind of place that seemed to repel visitors, its very atmosphere warning them to stay away. But Max and Clara were undeterred. With a team of law enforcement and scientists at their side, they approached the mansion. their footsteps muffled by the moss-covered ground. Max's hackles rose as they neared the entrance, his instincts telling him that this was the place where his nightmare had begun. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a talking dog saying something shocking at a shelter? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.